Welcome, everyone. I'm Scott Kuzner, Senior Director of Sciences and Regulatory Affairs at the Association for Accessible Medicine, AAM. I've been with the organization for about 5 years, and prior to AAM, I was with USP, and I had the pleasure of working with all three of their governing groups, and a lot of my presentation is going to touch on that experience. And today I'm going to talk about industry engagement in USP standard setting process with the intention of showing you how you can best engage in this process and ensure that your views, expertise, and company interests are represented. If I could say one thing about the purpose of this presentation, it's that to say you are not alone, and there are many ways for you to engage in this process to help refine and improve USP standards, which have been built on stakeholder and expert engagement for over 200 years. What I'm going to do is show you how to engage from a multitude of angles and doors that are wide open for you to engage. All of these actions are meant to protect medicines and the patients that they're designed for. And this is the crux of why it happens. If it makes the product safer, that's why these revisions and new standards are going to happen. So just want to keep that larger perspective in mind here as we go through this. So what I'm going to cover today are 6 ways that industry can stay engaged with USP standards. These range from the standard setting process itself, direct hands-on involvement through expert volunteer activities, all the way to strategic and peripheral activities that you should be aware of as you're engaging and following the standard setting process. All in all, what I hope to present here is a comprehensive 360-degree view of how to maximize your involvement. Before I get started, first I have a disclaimer, and that is the opinions presented here represent those of the speaker and should not be considered to represent advice or guidance on behalf of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. So what I've come up with are 6 ways for industry to stay engaged. The first is standards development. This is direct participation in the USP standard setting process and what you have to follow in order to stay engaged there. The second area are stakeholder events. These are USP hosted events that allow you to interface with USP staff, learn about standards development, and even contribute to some of the very early stages before standard revisions or new standards get published. The third area is expert contribution. This is ways to serve as a USP expert volunteer and have that direct hands-on experience. The fourth way is advocacy and collaboration. I'm going to go over some of the trade associations and industry groups you can engage with, become a partner with, who also are interacting with the standard setting process. The fifth area is regulatory awareness, going to touch on the need for monitoring FDA guidance and other public comment opportunities that have an impact on USP standards. And then the sixth and final area is strategic governance, specifically how to participate in USP's convention, which from a very high level has a very direct impact on the standard setting process every 5 years. So why are we doing this? Why are we mapping all of this out? And this is because compendial changes are complex. They impact functional areas within a company. They can impact multiple products also within that company. And they're needed for addressing compliance with global registrations. And they must address what's going on with pharmacopoeias around the world, making them even more complex. We're also doing this because improvements to the surveillance process can help ensure consistent compliance with compendial requirements. And when we look at this, it results in what we like to call a compendial end-to-end process. The compendial end-to-end process is not just about implementation of changes to standards, but it's a way to stay on top. You have to understand your company position, what it is, and how you're planning to be involved and advocate as well. So to ensure this ongoing compliance with new and revised compendial standards, this can be thought of as a customer-centric end-to-end process. There are largely 3 parts to this. There is strategy. This is the proactive advocacy for compliance. There's surveillance. This is the review, planning, and advocacy related to that. And then lastly, the third area is the implementation of all of this. And for all of these three aspects of the end-to-end compendial process, those 6 areas that I touch on are going to feed into all of these. So let's get started. The first area is standards development, and this is probably the area that you're most familiar with. I won't go into too much detail for some of these aspects because I know that USP's presentation is going to touch on a lot of this. So I'll be just flying over some of these areas just to emphasize those that you need to be aware of and follow. If you're unable to follow these, hopefully it can help you make the case within your organization for the need to build out that capacity in order to do so. So the first aspect of this is following the compendial announcements. That's you're looking at the Pharmacopeal Forum, PF, compendial notices, and new official text. And the new official text, which sort of have a few different forms. They're submitting your comments to PF. This is letting USP know your comments on the new or revised standards that it publishes in the PF. There's also requesting a revision. You can be proactive. You don't just have to follow what USP is putting out there for comment. You can also get involved in new monograph development or monograph donations. There's also understanding what you have to do with text after it becomes official and when that happens. And that's why it's really important to know the USP publication schedule, whether that's with PF or the new official text is published on the website. And then lastly, I'll touch a little bit here on the commentary that USP posts regarding its public comment period and sort of what you can learn from that and why it's important. Now, anecdotally, I'm going to touch a little bit here on monograph donations and what we hear from our AAM members about this. For example, we have one member who over the past 3 years submitted 21 monograph revision requests plus 13 new monograph proposals. That's a lot of submissions to USP now, and that's great work. And now, not all of the proposals went through. Some of them were canceled later due to updated product status. But for those that did go through, they wouldn't have if the organization didn't try in the first place. So I encourage all of you that as you're following this process, do submit your comments. They will make it through. They will be read, and some of them are going to make their way through the pipeline. I'd also like to make a brief mention here about some of the advantages our members tell us about monograph donation. And what we hear, sort of comes down to 3 major benefits in this area. First, when you donate a monograph, your methods and specifications are going to ultimately become the public standard, which means you won't have to spend a lot of resources and demonstrate method equivalencies with the monographs that are sponsored by someone else. Second, the company receives USP points, which they can use towards buying USP reference substances. And third, what we hear is the experience provided, our members with better exposure with USP, getting to know the staff. And from time to time, they would visit with the company with useful information and training, and it gives you the opportunity there to further build your rapport with USP. What I have here on the screen is a general compendial standard setting process that could apply to USP or any pharmacopoeia, which is, starts with a strategic direction, whether at a high governing level body or this is a work plan established by the pharmacopoeia or the expert committee itself. And I'm going to touch again on this later as I get further down in my presentation. But the basic process is they receive requests for new or revised monographs and journal chapters. They're going to consider whether they want to move forward on that, then develop those changes for something to go out as a draft for proposal and request input from the public. And as those revised or new standards go out for public comment, this is where off to the right here on the side, and I mentioned some of these before, this is where you're either going to be participating in or tracking those updates when it is in the stakeholder input phase. And again, I mentioned this before, this is submitting your PF comments. This is following the website announcements, compendial notices, revision bulletins, interim revision announcements, notices of intent to revise, general announcements about what's coming up, general chapter prospectus, which is a very early statement letting stakeholders know that the USP is considering an update to a general chapter. They're collecting information and they're letting folks know, and that gives you an alert to be aware of this, that's coming up. And then there's also the call for data. This is the request for stakeholder information. So again, it's more than just listening. There's the listening and monitoring, but there's also these active calls for input before the process starts, early during the process, and so forth. Here are some recent examples of key items for stakeholder input, whether this is the form of a general announcement letting folks know what is about to happen to a standard and where to expect it to be published or was published. There's also, as I mentioned before, a general chapter prospectus. This one here is for general chapter 1068. Again, this is letting folks know what's coming up, what are the objectives of it before that even gets published. There's the call for data request too, and this one here is request for stakeholder information relating to PF 51.3 and a number of monographs there that they're looking for data on. And lastly, I'm sure all of you have seen this before. This is an example of a stimuli to the revision process, which appeared in PF. Again, these are part of the quick flyovers, since I'm sure you're either aware of these or probably saw these in the USP presentation. And the last thing I want to mention about this process is that it's cyclical, it's ongoing. There can be revisions that overlap, and if you're reading the PF, or the USPNF, you can see the complex symbols that are used in the publication itself. So it can become like a living and breathing document. So it's never a one and done scenario. This process can start over again, and just want to emphasize that idea that there can be overlapping revisions to follow here. Yeah, and again, the thing I want to emphasize this is that follow that process, follow these announcements, because it's hard to ask for revisions after you've missed that commenting period, and you'll have to wait again. Again, there'll be another bus stop that'll pick you up, but you obviously want to try to get on that earlier bus rather than a later one. This is where you'll find compendial notices on the USPNF website. This is a list of notices of intent to revise. This is a list of revision bulletins, as well as an example. One thing to note about these is these will be on the USPNF website for just a little bit longer, but they're going to be incorporated into the USP platform soon. And what you see here on the screen, this example, this is letting you know what date it was posted, when it's going to be official, which expert committee was responsible for it, a brief summary of what the purpose of the revision is, and then a link to that PDF. And again, it's a PDF for now, but that is going to be incorporated into the platform. A list of interim revision announcements. For IRA announcements, these two are included on the USPNF website, but to see the monograph and general chapter, you're going to need to go into the platform. For USP accelerated revision announcements, again, these two are listed on the USPNF website, but to see them, you're going to have to go to the platform for the monograph or general chapter. With errata, one thing to note here is these are no longer on the website, and they too are just in the USPNF platform. The compendial revision and publication schedule is also something to pay close attention to for understanding the connection between a proposal that publishes in PF, when that comment period is going to be, which anticipated USPNF issue that's going to be put in, when it's going to be published, and then when those proposals will become official if they follow along the schedule and they are published along that way. Revision bulletins also have their own publication schedule to be aware of, when they're going to post online and when that becomes official. So compendial revision commentary. This is the last part of the standard setting area that I wanted to spend a little bit of time on. A lot of people will say, USP never listens to my comments, but I can tell you that they do. And you'll find that here in the commentary section. Inside the commentary, USP publishes the comments that are received and the outcomes from the expert committee, whether partially or fully accepted or not accepted. And for those of you who check commentary and track how your company's comments are presented in the commentary, you'll see some trends. And one thing you'll see, and you may want to apply to how your comments are submitted, is that you'll submit a very long letter and it can get edited down to a very succinct comment of exactly what is it that you're asking to change within the standard itself. This does not mean that you should not provide supporting data. That is, of course, immensely important. But the explanations themselves can be very easy to read when they're short, concise, and getting to what is the exact edit that you want in the monograph or general chapter. Written in the active voice, so that it's very easy to follow along what it is that you're asking. Inline edits, of course, help as well. You'll notice here the examples here are one that was accepted and one that was not. Comment is, as you can tell, is very succinct, and the response there highlighted in red is succinct as well, and it lets you know if it was incorporated or not and exactly what the change there was. The second area are stakeholder events. USP, holds a number of different types of events. These can be informational webinars or workshops, or on-demand courses. The one I would emphasize the most here are the workshops, because these are a way that you can get involved early in the standard setting process and get your input heard by USP before they begin the revision, and your input will be heard by both staff and members of their expert committees. So the third area where industry can engage with USP standard setting process is expert contribution, serving as a USP expert volunteer. So follow USP's call for candidates both before and during the cycle. They just concluded with 2025 relaunching their committees, and those terms are every 5 years, but expert panels which report into the committees are formed throughout the cycle as needed, as expertise is needed. So follow the URL here on the screen, callforcandidates.usp.org. You also might want to see who from your organization is represented in the USP volunteer system. But again, this is a great opportunity to have hands-on direct involvement with the standard setting process while you serve as an independent, objective expert, sharing your expertise with your peers, sort of see how everything is made behind the scenes. This is an excellent opportunity to share your expertise and perspective and network with your peers in the compendial space. The fourth area we're going to touch on is advocacy and collaboration, engaging with compendial trade groups. So again, this goes back to one of the things I said at the beginning of the presentation, is you're not alone in this. There are many industry trade groups and associations in the US, the EU, as well as those that are international based that you can participate in or speak with. Many of these groups are hoping to hear from you, and they would love your participation. I'll just make a few notes on this list here, and please note that there are more groups than this. I'm going to focus on the first one from our organization, the Association for Accessible Medicines. We actually have AAM USP working group who meets monthly. I noticed on the attendee logs for this webinar, there are a number of you represented in AAM's membership. Some of you might already participate in this working group. If you're not and you would like to, we'd love to hear from you. Please feel free to reach out to me so I can get you plugged into that group, and who from your organization is also managing that participation. And again, there's a lot of other groups here, listed on the screen. Some of these require a membership fee. Others don't. They're completely free. But this is another area where you can have a pretty big impact when you're joining your voice with those of others. The fifth area, which is a little tangential but still very important, is regulatory awareness. This is monitoring FDA guidances and public comment opportunities. I have on screen here 5 examples of where FDA published guidances that impacted USP standards. So, to help anticipate these changes, I recommend, be aware of the FDA guidances and their calls for public comment. The 5 here, related to carbomers, glycerin, nitrosamines, and several others. But again, this is an area, if you want to stay on the horizon, follow what FDA publishes for public comment, and evaluate those that you think are going to likely have an impact on USP's compendial standards. The 6th and final area industry can engage with USP standard setting process is strategic governance. And this is participating in USP's convention, which happens in a number of ways, not just necessarily at the convention meeting itself, which takes place every 5 years. This is often an overlooked area where stakeholders can really shape USP's governance via representation in organizations who are members of the USP convention, which currently sits at over 400. I think it's at about 450 some organizations. There's 6 different types. There are healthcare, practitioner, professional, and scientific associations, consumer and other organizations representing the public interest, manufacturer, trade, and affiliated associations. And some of those are listed a couple of screens back on those industry groups that I recommended folks participate in. Another area are governmental bodies or divisions of associations thereof. This includes HHS as well as several FDA offices and centers. There's also non-governmental standard setting and conformity assessment bodies. And lastly, academic institutions and associations thereof. Again, find out which of these organizations that you might have a connection to, or your company or another organization that you're a part of, like a trade association, as a member of, and you'll see you might have a route or an outlet there to make an impact. And so the USP convention, it takes place every 5 years, and it shapes the strategic direction of the organization in a number of ways. They make changes to their bylaws and other key governance documents, which shape the rules and procedures of their standard setting bodies. They vote on 5-year resolutions on what USP is going to look to achieve every 5 years. They also have a public call for input on resolutions. You could put forward those ideas, which takes place quite some time before the convention meeting itself. USP also puts its ideas out there for input from the public. Convention members also elect USP's Board of Trustees, who serve at the executive level of the organization and their governance structure. And then the convention also elects the chairs of the expert committees, who are also known as the Council of Experts. These are the leaders of the expert volunteers who have that direct hands-on experience that I was talking about earlier. So again, find out who your representative is, respond to USP's call for resolutions, which takes place every 5 years. Lastly, attend USP convention sector meetings. For example, throughout the cycle, they have sector meetings on generics and biosimilars, and they also hold regional chapter meetings based on geography. And when they hold these meetings, these are opportunities to directly interface with USP staff and their volunteers on topics that are of direct interest to you in industry. That's all I have for my presentation today. I thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.